The winter of 1893 in Vienna was bitter, the Danube shrouded in mist, its icy currents whispering secrets of forgotten times. The streets were slick with frost, lanterns casting eerie reflections on snow-covered cobblestones. The city, steeped in opulence and tradition, was alive with rumors. Rumors of a dinner that was to take place in the imperial palace, an event of grandeur, yet one that, in whispers, was said never truly to happen. The aristocracy spoke in hushed tones. Servants trembled behind closed doors, and the few who claimed to have witnessed the preparations told tales of unease, of shadows moving independently, and of a silence that pressed against the soul. Emperor Franz Joseph II sat in his study, ornate walls lined with oil paintings of long-dead Habsburg ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow his every movement. He was a man both revered and feared, carrying the weight of empire and the ever-growing knowledge that the world beyond his palaces was changing, becoming chaotic, unpredictable, dangerous. Yet even amidst political upheaval, something darker awaited him within the walls of the Hofburg. Preparations for the grand dinner had begun weeks in advance. Chefs, servants, and courtiers moved through gilded corridors with precision, setting tables with the finest china, silverware, and crystal glasses. Yet a subtle unease lingered in the air. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the floors, whispers of unseen voices curled through the corridors, and occasionally a tray or candlestick would shift as if moved by invisible hands. The palace staff tried to dismiss these as tricks of the light or fatigue, but fear rooted itself quietly, growing with each passing day. On the evening of December 14th, the palace was prepared, glittering under the glow of countless candles. The grand dining hall, enormous and magnificent, awaited its guests, yet the air carried a chill no fire could warm. Courtiers arrived in their finest attire, glittering gowns and tailored suits moving across the marble floors, but unease was visible in their faces. Eyes darted to corners where shadows lingered, and whispers passed quickly from lip to ear, tales of a dinner that had begun in preparation but seemed eternally suspended, caught between reality and something unseen. The emperor himself appeared, regal in his uniform, medals glinting, expression calm yet distant. He took his place at the head of the table, and the guests followed, each seat filled, each hand holding a glass of wine or crystal of water. Yet the table remained still. The first courses never arrived, though the kitchen had been in perfect readiness. Servants appeared and disappeared, trays carried an invisible weight, shadows flickering where no one stood. A strange sensation gripped the assembly, a sense that they were part of an elaborate illusion, participants in a performance whose stage had been set, yet whose actors were lost in time. It was then that the whispers began to emerge more distinctly, not from servants or courtiers, but from the walls themselves. The portraits of ancestors seemed to shift slightly in their frames, eyes glinting with a faint, malevolent life. Some guests swore they saw hands moving beneath the tablecloths, long pale fingers curling into the air as if grasping for something unseen. The emperor raised a hand to call for order, yet his voice seemed muffled, distorted, as though the very air conspired against him. As hours passed, the sense of unreality deepened. Candles flickered, shadows stretching impossibly, and the faint sound of music, strings playing in a minor key, echoed through corridors that should have been silent. The dinner, it seemed, existed only in expectation, never in fulfillment. Plates remained empty, glasses filled only with cold air, and servants moved with perfect synchronization. Yet somehow, the hall felt incomplete, haunted by absence. The courtiers whispered among themselves, their voices low and anxious. Some claimed that the kitchen staff had vanished without trace, their movements unseen, the food prepared but never served. Others spoke of a phantom chef, a figure glimpsed in the candlelight, robes dusted with flour yet face obscured, who moved through walls setting platters that disappeared moments later. Fear and fascination mingled, each guest caught in the dissonance of etiquette and creeping horror. Emperor Franz Joseph, usually composed, felt the weight of centuries pressing upon him. He sensed the eyes of his ancestors in the portraits, their silent judgment piercing through the velvet and gold of the palace. He understood in that moment that the dinner was a trap of sorts, a ritual of expectation and suspense, a convergence of the living and the specters of tradition. The palace itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, walls shifting imperceptibly, shadows lengthening toward the diners, and the music haunting, ethereal, playing on without musicians present. A sudden gust of wind swept through the dining hall, extinguishing half the candles and plunging the room into uneven darkness. Guests shivered, feeling unseen fingers brush their shoulders, cold and fleeting. Murmurs rose, each voice tinged with fear. One guest swore he felt a chair move beneath him. Another claimed to have glimpsed the reflection of a figure in the crystal glasses, tall, hooded, observing them silently. The Emperor's attempts to regain control were met with futility. Orders given aloud were unheard or ignored by invisible staff. The dinner, so meticulously prepared, refused to manifest. It existed as an idea, a shadow of a feast, a promise unfulfilled. Guests, now panic-stricken, began to leave, yet the doors seemed impossibly distant, the corridors extending, twisting, as if the palace had taken on a life of its own. Every step forward met resistance, shadows curling and shifting to obscure the path. By midnight, the grand dining hall was nearly empty. The few remaining guests felt the oppressive weight of something ancient pressing upon them. They could hear whispers from the portraits, feel eyes upon their backs, and the chilling sensation that the Emperor himself was ensnared in a ritual not of his choosing. It was a dinner that existed between worlds, a communion of expectation, fear, and the spectral forces that had long haunted the Hofburg. The guests who remained in the Hofburg now sensed an unbearable presence pressing upon them, unseen yet undeniable. The air grew colder, a chill that no fire could warm, and shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls and floor. Emperor Franz Joseph, seated at the head of the table, tried to assert control, but the palace itself seemed to resist, twisting and expanding, corridors lengthening, doors vanishing and reappearing, creating an impossible maze around the dining hall. Servants, visible moments before, now appeared as flickering illusions, faces pale, hands trembling, moving in ways that defied natural movement. Some carried plates, but when brought forward, they dissolved into thin air, leaving nothing but the faint scent of roasted meats and spices lingering in the cold halls. The guests began to realize the horrifying truth. The dinner existed only in a spectral echo, a phantom feast conjured by something older than the empire itself. A low, eerie music filled the corridors, strings vibrating with a mournful, minor tone. No musicians were visible, yet the melody seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The sound reverberated through the guests' minds, each note twisting their perception, making time itself feel fluid. Minutes stretched into hours, candles flickering in rhythm with the pulse of the music, shadows moving as if alive, curling toward the diners with silent intent. One young aristocrat, Count Leopold, ventured toward the kitchen, hoping to discover the cause of the missing courses. The corridor seemed longer than memory allowed, shadows stretching to block his path. He heard whispering voices, chanting, names of the Habsburg ancestors, recounting deeds of power, betrayal, and vengeance. Terrified, he tried to retreat, but the corridor behind him shifted, doors vanishing, forcing him further into darkness. In the dining hall, Emperor Franz Joseph's face was pale, eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight, haunted by the realization that the feast would never be consumed. The guests too began to panic. A phantom waiter approached, his form wavering, transparent, yet with a hand outstretched, offering a plate of food that melted into mist before it reached them. Another figure, a woman in an 18th century gown, appeared by the window, silent, her hollow eyes fixed upon the emperor, mouth moving without sound, communicating in thought alone, a warning, a demand, or perhaps a prophecy yet unknown. The palace itself seemed to pulse, walls breathing as if alive. Shadows separated from corners, creeping toward the diners, brushing against their clothing, passing through their hair, lingering on shoulders with icy fingers. Whispers became coherent, though their words were unintelligible to human ears, translating instead as dread, warning, and inevitable doom. The emperor realized with chilling clarity the dinner was never meant to occur. It was a manifestation of expectation, superstition, and an unseen force that toyed with human desire for ritual and order. Guests tried to flee. Doors, once visible, twisted into impossibility, corridors extending, looping back, as if the palace itself conspired to keep them trapped in this spectral theater. Each step forward felt heavier, each breath colder, each shadow longer. Some swore they glimpsed faces in the mirrors along the hall, ancestors of the emperor, pale and accusing, staring with eyes of judgment and contempt. One elderly duchess collapsed, weeping, claiming that the eyes of the dead were upon her. Demanding repentance, Emperor Franz Joseph rose, attempting to calm the assembly. "Remain composed," he said, voice firm yet trembling. "We are men and women of reason. This is but a trick of light and imagination." Yet reason offered no comfort. The music rose, reaching a crescendo, and the shadows deepened, coalescing into forms resembling courtiers from centuries past, faces twisted, eyes hollow, hands extended as if to claim something from the living. The guests' senses were overwhelmed. The warmth of reality slipped through their fingers, replaced by the icy embrace of a realm that existed parallel to their own. At the height of terror, a single voice cut through the chaos, a whisper at first, then loud and echoing. "The feast shall never be eaten. The debt is eternal. The emperor's hunger is as boundless as the curse that watches this hall." The emperor realized that the palace was not haunted merely by spirits, but by the consequences of centuries of expectation, ceremony, and ambition. The dinner was a reflection of history itself, desire for grandeur, control, and perfection manifesting as a spectral torment. The palace, loyal servants, and noble guests became actors in a ritual that had no conclusion, a performance where nothing could be consumed, nothing fulfilled. Guests were now fleeing into impossible corridors, some vanishing entirely, others returning with faces pale and eyes wide, whispering that they had seen figures of long-dead Habsburgs, their forms grotesque, weaving through walls and ceilings, enacting silent judgment upon those still trapped. Candles flickered, melting wax forming shapes resembling skeletal hands reaching toward the diners. By the early hours of the morning, only a few remained in the great hall. Emperor Franz Joseph, resolute despite the fear gripping him, stood at the head of the table staring into the shadows. He understood then that the dinner was a liminal event, bridging the living and the spectral, a manifestation of unfulfilled expectation and a test of endurance. The feast was eternal yet impossible. The guests were prisoners of their anticipation, entwined with history, superstition, and the palace's own malevolent will. The walls themselves seemed to breathe in unison with the emperor's realization. Shadows thickened, and a pale figure, the phantom host of the dinner, appeared once more, hovering above the empty table. Its eyes glimmered with unnatural intelligence, and its voice resonated directly in the mind of Franz Joseph. "No hand shall ever grasp the meal. No tongue shall ever taste. The feast is eternal, the hunger infinite. The emperor and his court shall witness but never partake." And with that, the candles flickered one final time, the shadows pooling into the corners, the music rising to an ethereal climax. The palace seemed suspended in time, a tableau of unfulfilled ritual, fear, and ancient expectation. The emperor's gaze swept across the empty plates, crystal glasses, and unmoving servants, objects of a feast that would never exist, yet haunted every thought, every breath, every heartbeat. The dawn never came. Outside, Vienna lay cloaked in snow and mist, a city unaware of the spectral horror unfolding in the heart of its imperial palace. Inside, the few remaining guests in the Hofburg felt the impossible weight of time stretching and warping around them. Hours had become days, minutes elongated into eternities. Emperor Franz Joseph stood at the head of the table, a lone figure amidst empty plates and ghostly servants, his expression grave, eyes haunted. The shadows that had haunted the halls now took more distinct form. Figures from centuries past, pale nobles, spectral chefs, courtiers long dead, materialized, walking the corridors, gliding across the marble floors, whispering in languages half forgotten, their eyes hollow yet filled with intent. The music, that mournful stringed melody, rose and fell, each note vibrating directly into the minds of the living, twisting perception, making the very walls seem alive. A sudden flicker of light revealed a phantom table setting beside the emperor, a plate brimming with food that evaporated before touch. glasses filled with wine that turned to smoke upon approach. The guests shivered, realizing that they were no longer participants in a dinner, but witnesses to a ritual, one in which anticipation was punishment, and fulfillment forever denied. Emperor Franz Joseph understood the horrifying truth. The dinner was a manifestation of obsession, tradition, and unyielding expectation. It was not meant to nourish, to please, or to celebrate. It was a mirror of the imperial mind, a spectral reflection of centuries of ceremonial perfection, obsessive ritual, and the weight of history itself. The pale figure appeared again, hovering above the table, robes flowing like smoke, eyes gleaming with cold intelligence. "You have seated yourselves for eternity," it whispered directly into the emperor's mind. "The feast is endless, yet never yours. The hunger you feel is a reflection of all that has been demanded, all that has been expected, and all that has been withheld. No hand may grasp, no tongue may taste. You shall witness, and the hunger shall consume you." Panic rose among the remaining courtiers. Some screamed, trying to flee through corridors that twisted impossibly. Doors leading only to walls, staircases descending into darkness. The palace had become a labyrinth, a living organism designed to entrap the living within its spectral whims. The shadows clung, hands cold and invisible brushing shoulders, whispering names, dates, and curses. The guests realized they were no longer moving through space, but through an eternal echo of desire and fear. A nightmare woven into the very fabric of the palace. Franz Joseph's resolve wavered, yet he stood, summoning the authority of the empire. "This ends now," he declared. "No shadow, no phantom shall bind us." But the words, though powerful in intent, had little effect. The palace responded with silence, then a crescendo of spectral activity. Shadows pooled into grotesque shapes, ghostly attendants and ancestral figures wailing in mournful chorus. Crystal chandeliers shook as if struck by invisible hands, candles guttered and extinguished, leaving the hall in near darkness. The emperor and his guests were encased in a realm between worlds, where every expectation manifested but never fulfilled, but never pressing upon him. Guests disappeared, drawn into shadows that were not shadows, corridors that were not corridors. Only he remained, gazing at the phantom feast, the invisible plates and ephemeral servants. In the final moments of perception, Franz Joseph understood fully. The dinner would never be consumed. The feast existed only in expectation, in desire, and in the terror of anticipation. The palace, the shadows, the music, the whispers, all were extensions of a reality that refused resolution. The emperor's gaze fell upon a final spectral hand, offering a plate of invisible delicacies. He reached for it and found only air. The music reached a climax, a single shrill note that seemed to pierce the soul. Then silence fell. Absolute, unbroken, and eternal. The emperor remained seated, alone at the head of a table that existed only in imagination and fear. The palace returned to its gilded stillness, the snow falling silently outside. But within, the echoes of the dinner lingered, a curse of expectation that would haunt every corner of the Hofburg for all time. Even today, those who enter the empty halls speak of a feeling, a presence, the awareness of a feast prepared yet never eaten, of shadows that linger just beyond vision, and of an eternal hunger that cannot be satisfied. The emperor's dinner never happened, yet it exists forever, a ghostly reminder that some desires, some rituals, and some traditions are too vast to ever be fulfilled, and that expectation itself can be a curse more powerful than any mortal hand.